You are a royal physician in the Palace of Madrid, and the year is 1834. The air in the royal chambers is thick with the scent of lilies and death, a cloying sweetness that cannot mask the underlying odor of decay. The king is dead. But your work, the most grotesque work of your life, is only just beginning. Before you stands the Queen Regent, Maria Cristina. Her face, usually a mask of regal composure, is a ruin of tears and sleepless nights. But it is not grief that animates her eyes, it is a chilling, desperate resolve. Her voice is a whisper that slithers into the silence of the room. Doctor, you know what must be done. For the sake of history, for the sake of truth, it must be preserved. Your hands, usually so steady during the most delicate of surgeries, tremble uncontrollably. You approach the great canopied bed where the body of Ferdinand VII lies in state. Even in death, his face seems to hold a sneer, a final mockery for the nation he terrorized for 2 decades. But your eyes are not drawn to his face. They are drawn to the heavy silk sheet, to the unnatural mound that rises beneath it. The source of it all, the curse that shaped a king, broke a succession of queens, and deformed a kingdom. The anatomical monstrosity that court historians would whisper about for centuries, but never dare commit to the official record. As you draw back the sheet, your mind screams. You are not merely a physician anymore. You are a curator of a nightmare, the preserver of the physical embodiment of a reign that was itself deformed, oversized, and ultimately a cancer upon everything it touched. You are about to embalm a secret, a horror of flesh and blood that explains so much. Before we delve into the forgotten stories of the women who endured this secret, the suffering that echoed in these gilded halls, consider what dark truths are hidden in the shadows of power. If you find yourself compelled by history's hidden truths, that small act of liking this video or subscribing ensures these stories are not lost to time. Let us know in the comments where you are joining us from as we cross borders and centuries together, united by a shared curiosity for the past. To understand the monster on the bed, you must first understand that he was born cursed, not by witchcraft or divine wrath, but by the slow, insidious poison of his own bloodline. For generations, the Spanish Habsburgs and Bourbons had practiced a suicidal alchemy of incest, marrying cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, weaving a genetic tapestry so tight it strangled reason and warped flesh. They sought to preserve the purity of their blood, and in doing so, they perfected its corruption. Ferdinand VII emerged from this toxic lineage on October 14, 1784. The living embodiment of royal decay. His parents, Charles IV and Maria Louisa of Parma, were first cousins, their union a testament to the dynasty's self-destructive pride. The genetic lottery had been rigged from the start. As the young prince grew, it became terrifyingly clear that nature had played a particularly cruel joke on the future king of Spain. While other boys developed normally, Ferdinand's anatomy began a monstrous journey of its own, growing in ways that defied medical understanding. By his teenage years, whispers had become a roar within the palace walls. Court physicians, men of science and reason, spoke of the royal anomaly in hushed, horrified tones. A member so massive, so bizarrely shaped, that it seemed a thing of alien biology. Secret medical records, hidden for a century in the Vatican archives to protect the dignity of the crown, described the condition in clinical terms that failed to conceal the horror. One physician wrote, "His Royal Highness is afflicted with a member of such extraordinary dimensions and peculiar form that intimate relations may prove a significant physical challenge." Another, in a private letter to his brother, was less delicate. "The prince's organ," he wrote, "resembles nothing so much as a gnarled aub. Thin as a candle at its base, it swells to the thickness of a man's fist at its extremity, and its length, God forgive me, its length is a thing of legend and terror." Imagine the psychological torment. Young Ferdinand, living in an age that prized the refined, classical proportions of Greek statuary, was marked by his own body as a grotesque. The very symbol of his manhood, the source of dynastic continuation, was for him a source of profound, festering shame. His childhood was a masterclass in dysfunction that would forge a tyrant. His father, Charles IV, was a weak-willed monarch who preferred the hunt to the throne room, while his mother, Queen Maria Louisa, openly conducted a ravenous affair with the Prime Minister, Manuel de Godoy. Ferdinand watched this daily humiliation, this theater of betrayal, and learned a simple, brutal lesson. Trust is for fools, and power is the only shield. But it was his physical secret that truly carved the contours of his soul. He learned to see mockery in every shadow, to hear ridicule in every polite cough, the giggles of servants behind their hands, the subtle jests of courtiers, the clinical curiosity in his tutor's eyes. They all merged into a single, deafening chorus of contempt. This humiliation did not break him, it petrified him. It bred a deep, cold resentment that would one day be unleashed on the whole of Spain. His paranoia was not entirely imagined. People were laughing at him, and he would make them pay. He would make them all pay. The darkness within him began to seep out. He grew secretive, vindictive. A young page, no older than 15, once accidentally walked in on the prince while he was changing. He saw the secret. Ferdinand did not simply dismiss the boy. He had him flogged until his back was a ruin of blood and flesh, and his entire family exiled from Madrid. The message was scorched into the memory of the court. To witness the prince's shame was a crime punishable by oblivion. As Ferdinand reached marriageable age, the crisis became acute. Dr. Francisco Flores, the king's personal physician, left behind secret notes that are a window into this medical nightmare. His Majesty's member, Flores wrote, measures near 10 inches in its natural state and grows considerably larger when aroused. But it is the configuration that is most alarming, a peculiar, almost violent curvature, and the presence of additional tissue growths that serve no discernible biological function. The implication was clear. Normal marital relations would be an act of violence. Producing an heir would require a miracle of engineering and endurance. Royal craftsmen, the same men who fashioned exquisite furniture and gilded carriages, were secretly commissioned to create what were euphemistically called marital aids. They worked in locked rooms, crafting specially designed cushions with channels and supports, harnesses of silk and leather, all to allow Ferdinand to function without maiming his future wife. He became obsessed with alchemy, spending a fortune on charlatans who promised miracle cures. He consumed foul-smelling potions of ground rhinoceros horn and powdered pearls, each one a testament to his desperation, and each one a failure that deepened his rage. In 1802, the first lamb was led to the slaughter. His cousin, the 18-year-old Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily. She arrived in Madrid, her head filled with romantic notions of her future husband, whom his supporters had nicknamed El Deseado, the Desired One. The wedding was a magnificent spectacle of gold and incense. Maria Antonia, beautiful and intelligent, saw in Ferdinand a charming prince. But royal weddings end, and wedding nights begin. The first sign of the horror to come was a quiet request from Ferdinand's valet to Maria Antonia's ladies-in-waiting. Special preparations were needed in the royal bedroom. Strange custom-made cushions were brought in, along with bottles of oils and salves, and implements that looked more suited to a surgeon's table than a bridal suite. Maria Antonia, sheltered and innocent, understood none of it. Her education had been in languages, music, and God. The mechanics of marriage had been explained in the vaguest of whispers. When Ferdinand finally entered the chamber and disrobed, her romantic fantasy shattered into a million pieces of terror. A lady-in-waiting, in a letter discovered 2 centuries later, described the scene. Her Majesty began screaming as though she had seen the devil himself. She scrambled backwards against the wall, her finger pointing, her voice a raw shriek of, "Monster! Monster!" until we feared she had lost her reason entirely. What followed was not a wedding night, but a clinical procedure. Ferdinand's physicians had to be summoned. They spoke to the hysterical princess not of love, but of duty, of anatomy, of necessity. The custom cushions were arranged, the oils were applied. Maria Antonia, her mind and body numbed with a heavy dose of laudanum, was positioned like a specimen for a gruesome experiment. The act itself was a trauma from which she would never recover. Her revulsion was palpable, a suffocating presence in the room. And for Ferdinand, already a man flayed by insecurity, her wife's terror was the ultimate insult. It was not just a rejection of his body, but of his very being, his royal dignity. Their attempts to produce an heir became a ritualized nightmare. He would summon his physicians, they would prepare the chamber, their movements practiced and grim. She would be dosed with laudanum, enough to make her compliant. The procedure would be performed with a cold, after which they would retreat to separate wings of the palace, each imprisoned in their own private hell. As the months turned into fruitless years, Ferdinand's desperation curdled into cruelty. He became convinced her disgust was a deliberate act of sabotage. He ordered the creation of restraints, fashioned from leather and silk, to hold her in place, to prevent her from flinching away from him. Twice, miraculously, Maria Antonia conceived. The court rejoiced. But both pregnancies ended in devastating miscarriages, her body brutalized and traumatized, unable to sustain life. Ferdinand saw this not as a shared tragedy, but as her personal failure, her treason. He accused her of secretly taking abortifacients, of harboring liberal sympathies that made her unwilling to provide a Catholic heir. He was destroying her, body and soul. She began to believe his accusations, spending her last months in a haze of laudanum and prayer, begging forgiveness for sins she had never committed. When Maria Antonia died in 1806, at the age of only 21, the official cause was a fever. The truth was, she died of despair, her body and spirit eroded by years of sexual trauma, drug addiction, and psychological abuse. Ferdinand's display of public grief was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Privately, he was already planning his next marital conquest. His political life mirrored his private dysfunction. He conspired against his own father, was captured, and, in an act of supreme cowardice, betrayed all his co-conspirators to save his own skin. This became his pattern: use people and then destroy them. When Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, Ferdinand was forced to abdicate, becoming a prisoner of the French. For 6 years he lived in gilded captivity, where French physicians, free from royal protocol, studied his condition with a cold, scientific curiosity. Their detailed reports, clinical and brutal, confirmed the horror. They theorized that he was the result of a perfect storm of genetic dysfunction. While Spain bled in a brutal war of independence to restore him to the throne, brave men dying in his name, Ferdinand's primary concern was writing letters to other royal courts, seeking a new bride. When he finally returned to Spain in 1814, the crowds greeted him as a savior. They wept with joy. They kissed the ground his carriage rolled over. They did not know they were welcoming back a man whose soul had become as twisted as his body. His first priority was not rebuilding his shattered kingdom, but commissioning a new, more sophisticated set of marital aids. The second wife was Maria Isabel of Portugal, another cousin. She was 19. The wedding night was a repeat of the first, a symphony of screams and terror that echoed through the palace. Servants reported finding blood-stained sheets and broken furniture. Maria Isabel was broken on that first night. She developed a stutter and would flinch violently whenever Ferdinand entered a room. Her waking hours were a fog of anxiety, her sleep a gallery of nightmares. Ferdinand, interpreting her trauma as disrespect, subjected her to a campaign of psychological terror. He had her mail intercepted, her food tasted for poison, her chambers searched for evidence of conspiracy. The pressure for an heir became a grotesque public spectacle. Desperate, Ferdinand allowed foreign specialists, German anatomists, French physicians to observe his attempts at procreation. The royal bedchamber became a medical theater, Maria Isabel the unwilling star in a pornographic tragedy. She was no longer a queen, but a living experiment, her dignity stripped away under the clinical gaze of strangers. Her mind finally snapped. She stopped eating, her eyes taking on the vacant stare of a ghost. In 1818, after 2 years of this living hell, Maria Isabel died during a complicated childbirth. The child, a daughter, died with her. Ferdinand's grief was indistinguishable from his paranoia. He became convinced they were murdered and launched a terrifying investigation, arresting several of his dead wife's ladies-in-waiting. He had a death mask made of her face and displayed it in his private chambers, where he was often seen having conversations with it. The search for a third wife began. By now, Ferdinand's reputation was legendary. Several royal houses refused the offer. Eventually, a financially desperate Saxon family offered up their daughter, Maria Josefa Amalia. She was older, more pragmatic. She arrived in Madrid in 1819 not as a romantic bride, but as a clinician prepared for a difficult case. Their marriage was a decade-long series of scheduled, medically supervised procedures. She kept a detailed journal, noting techniques and outcomes with the precision of a scientist. Her cold detachment infuriated Ferdinand even more than his previous wife's terror. Then, in 1829, after 10 years of clinical matrimony, the impossible happened. Maria Josefa was pregnant. Ferdinand's joy was manic, indistinguishable from madness. He placed his wife under armed guard, her every move monitored. But the curse of his bloodline would not be so easily cheated. The queen went into premature labor. The delivery was a blood-soaked horror. The child, another daughter, lived for only a few hours. Maria Josefa died 3 weeks later. Ferdinand, utterly broken, refused to allow their bodies to be buried. For nearly a week, the stench of death filled the palace as the king demanded his physicians perform resurrections. But fate had one final cruel joke to play. His advisors, desperate for an heir to stabilize the collapsing kingdom, arranged a fourth marriage to another of his nieces, Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies. And here is the ultimate irony of Ferdinand's tragic life. When Maria Cristina arrived in Madrid, she was already pregnant by another man. The king, so obsessed with his own fertility, so desperate for an heir he could not produce, knowingly accepted a lie. He participated in the farce of a wedding, pretending the child in her womb was his. The birth of Isabella II in 1830 was the culmination of his life's quest, and it was a complete fraud. His final years were a descent into a paranoid hellscape. Knowing Isabella was not his blood, he was tormented by the fiction he was forced to maintain. He had peepholes drilled into the walls of his wife's chambers, spending hours watching her, a demented voyager in his own palace. He subjected her to midnight raids with armed guards, bursting in to search for imaginary conspirators. The court devolved into a theater of suspicion, a place where a careless word could mean death. In the autumn of 1833, his body finally gave up. He died not of a single disease, but of a lifetime of accumulated stress, frustration, and rage. The secret autopsy revealed the full truth. The monstrous organ, scarred and deformed not just from birth, but from Ferdinand's own pathetic secret attempts at self-surgery. He had spent his life trying to carve himself into normality, and had only succeeded in mutilating himself further. And so we return to you, the physician, in that silent, lily-scented room in 1834. Your task is complete. Before you, sealed in a glass jar of preserving fluid, floats the grotesque relic. It is more than just flesh. It is a monument to the destructive power of shame. It is the physical manifestation of a tyranny born from a secret humiliation. Ferdinand VII, the desired one, finally rests. But he left behind a kingdom as broken and dysfunctional as his own body, a nation that would spend the next century tearing itself apart in civil wars born from the chaos of his reign. His story is a chilling reminder that the most private demons of those in power can become the public nightmares of an entire nation.
and that sometimes the greatest monsters in history are not forged in ambition, but in the deep, dark well of their own secret suffering.